Oh God, today, particularly at this moment, we give thanks for how you've been with us in our time of worship. There's something about singing together. It's almost a form of prayer and meditation. And at the same time, if it can be a form of an offering, then we want it to be so, that you would receive our hearts and you would receive the words that come out of our mouth in such a way that is a blessing to you. Then we want that. That's what we hope to accomplish when we worship. At the same time, God, when we look at a text, we want to be formed by the text, which means that if you need our permission or our acceptance to be open to how your gospel comes in a way where you add your spirit into worship and your spirit into the reading of a text so that our lives can be changed by it, then that's ultimately what we want. So we dedicate this time specifically to allow the text to be transformative for us. Oh God, we pray. This we ask in the name of Christ. Amen. Do you believe it's possible for a leopard to change either his or her spots? You think that's possible? And that's a saying that shows up in our community all the time. You might have used it before. And most of the time, whenever we make that statement or we ask that question, it's from a negative connotation. What we believe when we say this is that a leopard really can't change his spots or change her spots. And when we apply that to human beings, what we mean is that a person is born and there's a period of time in their development, and we don't know really what age. I guess there are different people that would argue what age that would take place, but after a certain age, that whatever it is doesn't change. Whatever it is, that's what the person is going to be. That's personality, how they act, the things of that nature. And so when we say a leopard can't change his spots or change her spots, what we mean is that the people, they just can't change. Well, I don't agree with that, obviously. And I think Jacob in our text is one of the best examples for the fact that people really can change. And so what I want to do today and next Sunday is I want to look at Jacob's life over these 2 Sundays and pick out parts of his life, really with what it means with changing, how people change. And so to understand a little bit about Jacob and to set the stage for today, we need to think back to our Sunday school lessons or maybe our VBS lessons about Jacob. Remember, the first patriarch in the book of Genesis, the first major patriarch, was a guy by the name of Abraham. That was Jacob's grandfather. Abraham has a son. You know his name? That's all right. You can participate. That's all right. Just close your eyes. Ready? Isaac. All right, perfect. We all got it right. Thank you. So we all passed the test. So you don't have to worry about anything else for the rest of the sermon. Well, he has a son, Isaac. And then Isaac has 2 sons that are fraternal twins. One of them is a guy by the name of Esau. The other one is a guy in our text, Jacob. Now, Esau was his dad's favorite. He would be the epitome of a rugged guy. He was very masculine, very hairy. He liked to hunt and fish. He loved the outdoors. And we can at least surmise or imagine that Isaac and Esau spent a great deal of time out into the wilderness or into the wooded areas hunting and maybe even fishing. But Jacob was the opposite. And that sometimes happens inside of families. You have one child that's this way, and you have another child that's the opposite. Jacob, probably the best way to use a slang phrase or term that we would use to describe people, Jacob was a little bit more of a mama's boy. He spent most of his time with his mother. He spent most of his times with the women that were around the tent. But we do know something about Jacob. He was incredibly crafty, and he was very, very smart. For instance, one day his brother is out on a hunting trip, and I don't know if you've ever went on these hunting trips that go out for a few days, and you're out in the woods or a cabin, and you might eat a little bit, but you're spending most of the times out in the woods, and so when you come back from hunting, you're hungry. Well, Esau was incredibly hungry, and so he walks in. Well, Jacob just happens to be eating at a time when Esau's coming in, and so naturally one brother says to the other brother, give me some of your food. Maybe there's a little bit of an argument, but Jacob leverages that into his benefit. And so what he tells his brother, said, well, I'll be happy to share my food with you, but in return, I get your birthright. Now, birthrights, that's really not I mean, how many of you use birthrights in your family conversations today? I'm sure that's going to show up inside lunch today or breakfast. You sit down and y'all are going to talk about birthright, right? We don't use that word. The better word for us is inheritance. That's really what a birthright was. And so, the way it worked in the Old Testament is that the first son born would get 2/3 of the inheritance. The other third would be split by the other children. And so when Esau comes in and he's hungry and Jacob says, I want your birthright, what he's asking for is, I want the larger portion of the inheritance. And so for whatever reason, I don't know if you've ever been this hungry, but Esau agrees. And Esau realized this is probably an empty promise. Nothing's going to, Isaac's not sick. He's going to be okay. I'm just hungry. I want some food. But nonetheless, there's a day come when their father, Isaac, is dying. He's old, he's bedridden, he's blind, and he calls Esau in, and what everybody in the family and the community knows that this is going to be the time that he's going to talk about inheritance. And he calls him in and he says, before I give you your inheritance, I want you to do one thing for me. I want you to go out, I want you to kill an animal and prepare for me one more time that wonderful venison stew that you would always fix for me. And so Esau immediately runs out, he grabs his bow and arrow, out in the woods he goes. But Rebekah, the mother, is sitting with Jacob, just kind of waiting in the wings, and they begin to hatch a plan. And so Rebekah looks at Jacob and says, now here's your opportunity. I'm going to go out, I'm going to kill these 2 small goats, I'm going to make some stew real quick. We're going to take some of the goat skin, we're going to put it on you. You're also going to dress up in your brother's clothing, you're going to smell like him, and you're going to go in and you're going to give your dad, he can't see anyway, you're going to give him the stew. And you're going to say, give me the inheritance. And that's what happens. Jacob swindles his father for 2/3 of the family's inheritance. Well, you might know the story. About the time that Jacob comes out from his dad's tent, Esau's coming back in. He's went out and killed an animal, and he can put 2 to 2 together, and he realizes real quick what has happened. He's just lost. And so in his rage, he looks at his brother and says, I'm going to kill you. Well, naturally in fear, Jacob is trying to figure out what to do, and he goes to his mother, and his mother says, well, I'll tell you what, we've got relatives way over here in this other country, this guy by the name of Laban. Go to him, and we're going to say you're going under the idea to find a wife so that no one will know what we've done. And so that's what he does. He leaves, middle of the night. And the idea is he's going to go over to Laban, this distant relative, and that you're going to find a wife there. And you're going to be free from your brother's wrath. Well, along the way, from where he's at to Laban's a pretty good journey, so he stops midway at this place called Bethel. Now, we know a little bit about Bethel in the book of Genesis because Jacob's grandfather, Abraham, this was a very important place for him. He built a number of altars there because whenever Abraham lost his way, he would go to Bethel because that's first where he met God. And so Jacob, knowing or unknowing this, we don't know, sleeps at that Bethel hotel, and he sees something. Now, we know this is something we call Jacob's ladder. Now, we don't know if it's a literal ladder or not. Basically, Jacob has a vision where he sees heavenly beings going up and down. And commentators are split on whether or not that's God himself or whether or not that's an angel. On one level, it really doesn't matter. But Jacob has a conversation with this either angel or with God. And the conversation goes something a little bit like this. I tell you what, obviously you know a little bit about heaven because you're going up and down, back and forth to heaven, and which means that you've got assets and abilities that I don't. So let's make a deal. If you will take care of me, if you will make sure that I always have clothing and provisions, if you'll make sure that I always have food, and if I have wealth, and if you will one day return me back to my father's house in peace, then I'll serve you. You'll be my God. Now, I don't know if you've ever prayed something like that. I have. We call those foxhole prayers. And the idea is normally when you're in a fix or in a pickle and you want to get out and you don't want it to cost you any pain, what do? Oh God, if you could just do this for me, just this one time, Just one time, if he could just work out in my favor, then, I'll serve you more. I'll sign up for St. Paul for all. I'll give myself more. Not just me, even my family. I'll get my husband, I'll get my wife, I'll get my children to even do it. That's what it was. What he's doing is he's trying to finagle a deal. That's his nature. That's what he did with Esau. Give me your birthright. That's what he did with his father, tricking him. And now he's even trying to do it with God. Well, he leaves there, and we don't know really what happens. We know the story just kind of ends open-ended. And so eventually he goes to Laban, and Laban's going to hire him. And he says, well, I'll tell you what. I got a deal for you. This guy's a deal maker, right? Says, don't pay me one dime. I don't need a single penny. I want to work for you for 7 years because I've seen your younger daughter, Rachel, and she is very, very pretty. In our house, I think the way my son says it is, she's smoking hot. And so he says, I don't need any of your money. At the end of the 7 years, just give me her hand in marriage. So Laban says, hey, that sounds like a deal to me. I get free labor for 7 years. She's going to get married at one day. You're a pretty good guy, I guess. And so he works for 7 years. At the end of the 7 years, there's this big wedding party, and there's all kind of things going on, and probably a lot of wine was served, and we don't know exactly how much Jacob had, but he wakes up the next morning thinking that it's going to be Rachel in his house, but who it is, it's his older sister, or her older sister, Leah. And so what's ironic in the text, or at least in the story, is Jacob goes to Laban and screams foul that he's been dishonest, that he's worked out this sideways deal, and it's the first time it's been turned on him. That's ironic, isn't it? His whole life has been about swindling people, and once somebody threw one past him, he's upset. But that happens sometimes. And so he says, well, I'll tell you what, Jacob, it's right by our customs for the older daughter to marry before the younger daughter. If you'll just work 7 more years, then I promise you, you can have Rachel's hand in marriage as well. So that's what he does. But along the way, he figures out something. Jacob does. His mind's always turning, trying to make a deal. And he figures out the best way to cheat Laban of the best of his flocks. To put it in our day and term, he's figured out how to skim off the top. And so for 7 years, he does that. And he becomes incredibly wealthy, even wealthier than Laban himself. Well, at the end of the 7 years, he does marry Rachel, but he understands that now he might be in trouble. Sooner or later the gig's going to be up, right? You can't just swindle everybody all the time. Eventually somebody's going to know. And so maybe it's the bookkeeping day. Maybe it's time to reconcile accounts. And so he looks at his wives, and he looks at all of by that time, his children and his servants, and says, we've got to get out of Dodge, and we've got to go now in the middle of the night. So that's what they do. They leave. Well, about a day or so later, Laban realizes that, hey, this guy's gone, and he's gone with a great deal of my money, and he's gone with some of my family. And so he calls for the posse, and out the posse goes. And after 3 days, they catch Jacob. But Laban's he's in a pickle, because what he really wants to do is strangle him. But he can't do that, right? Because that's the father of his grandchildren, and that's the husband of his daughters. And so they just sort of part ways, really in hopes that they'll never see each other. Well, not long passes before now Jacob is really sort of homeless, so he starts moving back towards his homeland, and Esau gets wind of it. And so Esau, his brother, now remember the last time we saw Esau, he said, I want to kill you. Esau sends a message to him that says he's coming, and he's coming with 400 men. Well, you can imagine what's going on in Jacob's mind. That's where we find the text. What Jacob does is he creates a plan that says, I'm going to wear my brother down. I'm going to create all these buffers from, all these gifts. I'm going to try to bribe him. I'm going to buy him off. And so maybe, he's going to hit my servants, and then he's going to hit all these gifts, and he's going to hit some more of my servants, on down the line, and finally he'll get to me. And maybe when he gets to me, he's not hungry, he's not mad, I've paid off, I've greased the wheels enough that he'll let me live. That's the text. Or at least when we get to the text. I think this sets up perfect for different things that go on inside of Jacob's mind and in his life that can lead to change. First thing we know about Jacob is he's in a pickle. And we've been there. Okay? So the situation in Jacob's life might not be the same as ours, but it's close. We can relate. And the first thing we discover in verse 24 is Jacob was alone. I can't stress to you how much being alone at certain points, we call that solitude. Our life thrives on busyness, and it thrives on noise. I mean, so much so that if no one were to talk inside this room for about 5 minutes, after 2, we would be uncomfortable. We look for noise. If it's not noise, literal noise, do you know that in an hour, the average person will look to their phone 228 times? We spend over 25% of the day that we are awake, not counting the sleep, on our phones. It's noise. Now, it might not be noise. We might just be strumming through Facebook and people's pictures. What do? We're preoccupied. We long for busyness. Solitude stops that for a period of time. Not forever. Because solitude is where you pull away for a period to be alone so that you can quiet your life, and then you go back and re-engage. Solitude is not solitude forever. The discipline of solitude in the church is I retreat for a period of time to get rid of the noise, to calm my life down for a period of time so I can learn certain things. Jacob is alone. His whole life has been about noise. And now, he's by himself. Something takes place in the solitude that's interesting in Jacob's life, and it will take place in the solitude inside of your life. And that is this. He ends up wrestling with God. Which means that there might be some pain involved. See, the temptation for us is inside of our life is to avoid conflict. We like our comfort zones. We like them, whatever they are. Good, bad, or indifferent. We are creatures of habit by nature when it comes to the inside of us. And, there's a law in physics that say an object at rest will stay at rest. And that's true inside of our life. And people, you know how people change? When they realize that the pain in their life, and they will endure a lot of pain to stay at rest, the pain in their life, that becomes greater than the pain that it takes to change. But change does involve wrestling. And it might even involve something painful. Because the temptation for denial, the temptation for avoidance, the temptation for preoccupation are so great in our life. Because that's what we're used to. And we will avoid solitude. We will avoid a number of things just to keep it like it is. Jacob is alone. He wrestles. And the climax of the wrestling is he has to own up to who he was. That's what we see in the text. Now, it doesn't say it that way. What the text says is, what's your name? Who are you? Well, I'm Jacob. You know what Jacob means? Deceiver. I'm a swindler. I'm a cheat. I'm a liar. I did it first with Esau. Then I did it to my father Isaac. I did it with Laban, my uncle, my relative. And now I'm trying to do it again with Esau. My name has been about this for me. It's interesting that when they're wrestling, God says, who are you? Tell me your name. That's larger than just the name his parents gave him. Tell me who you are. Tell me your nature. So what's your nature? What's your name? Is it selfish? Envy? Anger? Wrath? Lust? Greed? What is it? If you were to put yourself in the text, what would it be? Idolater? Who are you? You know, it's a wonderful book. They don't use these terms. A guy, John Ortberg. Some of you know John Ortberg's out in California. I'm about almost finished with the book. It has to do with shadow missions. It says we all have a mission, you know, to serve God. And he said, but there's a shadow mission that's the converse of that. That there's parts of our nature that if we're not careful, we'll gravitate towards that and not the mission called by God. Great book. Same concept. Who are you? Not the name your parents gave you. Can we be honest enough? Now, if we're seeking after change, at some point, we have to come to grips with who we are. One of my favorite books, and they've made a number of different movies on it, is The Count of Monte Cristo. Y'all have heard me talk about this. There's a part in there that this is the best example I've ever seen in literature, where the Count, he's hatched this plan to get back with everybody that's done him wrong. And even when he realizes that there were people that were innocent in there, the love of his life, and even when he realizes that he has a son by her, he cannot stop himself. And his best friend is coming and he's pleading with him and saying, don't do it, stop all this. And finally he pushes his friend away and he says, my name is vengeance. Can't stop. That's how he sees himself. It's hard to admit that. To come to grips, painful. One of the things I love about 12-step programs is the first part. I don't know if you've ever, I hope you never need anything like that in your life. I do. But one of the great things, if you ever go and or know somebody that's a part of that, or you experience something like that, the very first part when you go, it's, hello, my name is, and you fill in the blank, and you say, I am, and you fill in the blank. That's step one. You can't do the next 11 without coming to grips with step one. Jacob, maybe for the first time in his life, comes to grips with everything that he is. My name is Deceiver. But then watch what happens. God is not content just with that. I mean, that'd be pretty twisted of God to bring somebody to a place where they admit who they really are deep down. And it's wanting to change and try and just say, okay, well, now that you know it, just live into that. That's not what God does. Jacob comes to the conclusion of who he is. And then also in the text says, no, your name is no longer called Jacob. Your name now is Israel. And what he discovers is that God gives him a vision of what he can become. This is what I love about the New Testament. When you read the New Testament, you study it from, say, the 1,000-meter view, and it shows up from Matthew all the way to the book of Revelation. Same thing takes place. Before someone becomes perfect, which means before they've lived into every aspect of it, God, by name, tells them how he sees them and who they are. And then the rest of it is, God, it's like God saying, this is who you are, now prove me right. Live into the person I know you can be with my help. You're no longer Jacob. Now your name is going to be Israel. Go and live into how I see you. You know what your name is in the New Testament? We can make a list of them. I'll give you a few. Beloved, child of God, chosen one, holy one, priest, saint. You could go on down the list. But if you want to know the name that God has for you, these are them. This is how he sees you. He looks at Jacob and says, Jacob, you're no longer the cheater, the deceiver. You are Israel. You are mine. You belong to me. And at some point, when it comes to changing, we have to, solitude helps, and there's pain involved, because eventually we have to come to grips with who we are. And sometimes that's even naming it. The first time, even why confession is so important. And then allowing God to create for us, to help us see who we really are and what we can become. You know, the most successful, I watch a ton of sports. Outside of the news, probably the thing I watch most is sports. And the athletes who are always at the top of their game, it doesn't matter what sport or what field, they always talk the same way. What they will say, they refer to themselves as already accomplishing whatever it is. If it's golf, I'm going to win it. If it's football, baseball, volleyball, soccer, it doesn't matter. When they refer to themselves, they speak about themselves as, this is the person that I am. Now I train and I practice because I'm living into how I already see myself. It's the same thing with God. This is who you are. You're beloved, holy one, chosen one, saint, priest. The list could go on. We could spend the rest of today giving the names in the New Testament that how God sees you. Now go and live into how God sees you. Now you need to know there's something else too. And this is very much a part of it. He walks with a limp. That has everything to do with his past. It doesn't go away. But the beauty with God, and this is so beautiful. The beauty with God, it just doesn't rule over you anymore. You don't forget it. It doesn't go away. It actually can become a source of strength. Let me tell you how. Can you imagine? We don't know this. This isn't in the Bible, but we can at least we can think for a moment. What do you think it was like in his family when his children or his grandchildren or his friends saw him and he's limping? Well, what did children say? Daddy, or granddaddy, pop, whatever they call him. Why are you limping? And he tells the story. Well, see, there was a time in my life when I was Jacob. And then there was a time where I met God and my name changed. It's no longer Jacob. I'm Israel. His past didn't go away. Yours won't either. That's not what forgiveness is. That's not what change or transformation. That's not what salvation is. It just doesn't control you anymore. And it's an act of God. See who you are and go live into it. Now, the symbol, and this is the reason why we're doing this on Communion Sunday, there is not a better symbol inside the history of the church than communion that illustrates this. Because when we take communion, what we do is we confess what? We are not worthy. Never, ever will we ever be. But out of the goodness of God, we have a new name. And out of the acts of God that show up in Jesus Christ, we are now accepted into the beloved, Jesus. Which means that we can feast at his table. Because we're not called deceiver or cheater or liar. We're called son, daughter, holy one, chosen one, saint, priest. And you have a place at his table. And so when you eat of the bread and you drink of the juice, it is symbols that we all can change. You ask me if a leopard can change his or her spots? You bet they can. But it might involve solitude. It's going to involve some wrestling. It's going to involve coming to grips, maybe for the first time, with who we really are and the tendencies and our nature. And it's going to come to grips with God peeling back all those clouds and show us who we are in him. It will not erase our past, but you will not be controlled by it. You can change. Oh God, as we have the echoes of this text and we see this lesson about Jacob, and we know that it's really more than about Jacob, it's about us. We're Jacob. Might not be called that, might not have the same struggles, but we definitely understand the concepts. Lord, as we take communion, what we want to do is pray that we want to consecrate these elements. And part of that is that we confess that we're in need of your grace and mercy. We confess that, we confess that it really doesn't matter how we spin it. We confess that we are sinful. And so we need your forgiveness and your grace and mercy. And at the same time, we want to pray that the elements in some form or fashion become symbols of your Son, his body, his blood, that was poured out and given so that we can change and have forgiveness. Not just a one-time deal, but a constant and always deal. So that what happens is that we become more like you. Oh God, we pray for this, and we long for this, and we pray for it in the name of Christ. Amen.